So last week, the Indian Railways tied up with a German company called TUV-SUD. This was for a safety audit of one of its latest initiatives towards sustainable mobility. What am I talking about? Hydrogen trains. Now, TUV-SUD is a globally renowned certifier, and the Indian Railways tie-up with this company is obviously to ensure that it has world-class hydrogen trains. In fact, the first hydrogen train from the country is set to begin trial operations by the end of this year. Of course, India is doing more, much more in terms of hydrogen transport. For instance, it wants to launch hydrogen-powered ships too. In fact, the government has issued guidelines for pilot projects utilizing green hydrogen in the shipping sector. Also, 3 major ports will be developed as hydrogen hubs under India's Green Shipping Initiative, which is part of the Maritime India Vision 2030. Here's more. The Ministry of Port, Shipping and Waterways has said that it will provide 30% financial support for promoting green shipping. In February, Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched India's first green hydrogen fuel cell inland waterway vessel. Now, India's ambitions are not limited to just trains and ships. The government has launched the National Hydrogen Energy Mission to promote overall hydrogen-based transportation. Oil India Limited has set up India's first green hydrogen pilot plant. Several Indian companies such as Tata Motors, Mahindra & Mahindra and Ashok Leyland are working on developing hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. Additionally, there are planned international collaborations with companies such as Hyundai and Toyota also. Speaking of, did you know the Transport Minister Nitin Gadkari drives a car called Toyota Mirai, which runs on, you guessed it, green hydrogen. So what is behind India's enthusiasm? What is the road ahead? Are there challenges? And how long before hydrogen becomes mainstream? All this and more in today's episode. It's Tuesday, the 8th of October. I'm your host Anirban Chaudhary. This is the Morning Brief. First up, my colleague and ET's man for locomotives and all other forms of transport, Tvesh Mishra. We talk about hydrail or hydrogen trains, on which you've written a couple of very good stories. I'd like to start by asking you, how significant is hydrail in India's initiative towards sustainable public mobility?
India has been making multiple efforts to wean away from crude oil dependence by adopting greener and cleaner fuels. Hydrogen is one of the cornerstones over here, but it also means that the railway is going for a multi pronged approach. So, we are looking at procuring more renewable energy and injecting that into the railway grid so that our trains run on clean energy, solar or wind powered as modes of transport instead of running on coal powered electricity. And hydrogen is also a new fuel that the railway is developing, and they plan to run the first train by the end of the year. So the prototype is ready. It's supposed to start trials. So we are expecting the first run of the hydrogen powered train very soon on the Indian Railway.
Understood. What are the Indian government's plans around, hydrogen trains? I'm talking about investments. You recently wrote that it has sort of roped in a German firm for quality checks. Can you tell me all of that?
In the near term, the Indian Railways wants to have 35 trains that can run on hydrogen, and they're estimating the cost per train at around 80 crores. And this will be topped up by an investment of 70 crores per route where the train will run. So I'm not saying that it is much cheaper than the existing rolling stock on the Indian Railways, but it's also not more expensive than a Vande Bharat or a newer variant of rolling stock that the Indian Railways wants to adopt. So as far as these hydrogen trains are concerned, it's expected to run in North India. And interestingly, a supply for fuel has also come up over there with a 1 megawatt polymer electrolyte membrane electrolyzer at Jind in Haryana, which will be supplying the hydrogen required for the first route of the hydrogen train.
Is there a target on how much of the railways network will be covered by hydrogen trains in the near future? And also, would you talk to me about the challenges in this initiative?
At this stage, the Indian Railways wants to run these trains only at routes which are not very commercial in nature, but have a more tourist-oriented outlook, such as the one in Shimla. This new train which is coming, which is supposed to run in December, it is supposed to run in Haryana, over in the northern region. Now, as far as the challenges are concerned, while hydrogen production has been available in the country, India is now the fifth country in the world that will have a hydrogen train. So technology is still very new, and a lot of the prototypes need more maturity before they can be pushed into full blown commercial production. The other aspect is the hydrogen which is available in the country. Most of it is not green. Most of it is produced using fossil fuels. So, one challenge is to ensure that we are able to produce clean hydrogen, not just the byproduct after burning the hydrogen, but the process of creating the hydrogen also needs to be green to ensure that the entire value chain is decarbonized as soon as possible. So that technology, that transition also needs to happen to ensure that we get a green hydrogen, which will end up powering the trains. A lot of focus is on hydrogen for running cars, running ships. There have even been some people who want to run airlines or aviation with hydrogen. There are targets to reduce the costs by 2030. Some corporates have also laid out such targets. There's a lot of investment happening in developing hydrogen manufacturing units as well. So it is expected that the availability of hydrogen globally as well as in India is going to ramp up significantly. What remains to be seen is how effectively are the existing companies that are in the mobility business able to adopt hydrogen to make it a commercially viable use case.
Now, the hydrogen story globally is not new. It was in 1965 that the first hydrogen powered locomotive was developed in the United States. A year later, General Motors developed the first hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, the GM Electrovan. Of course, it was only in 2000 that the world's first hydrogen powered ship, the Hydrogen Challenger, was launched in Japan. Since then, every transportation company worth its salt, from Toyota to Hyundai to Daimler Chrysler to BMW, Siemens, Alstom, Germany, Skoredia, China, CRRC, shipbuilders from Mitsubishi to Kawasaki, all of them have invested in hydrogen transportation. Notable train projects have come from Germany, France, China, Japan, and now India. It was Iceland which introduced the first hydrogen powered bus in 2002. Others like Norway and South Korea have also been key players. The story of green hydrogen specifically is more recent, more like 10-15 years. To understand this and much more, I spoke to Anurag Nallapaneni, a hydrogen and clean energy researcher with over 10 years of experience. He's now a manager for green hydrogen projects at the World Research Institute. Anurag, let's start with a very basic question. Globally, how big is hydrogen?
Hydrogen actually has been used globally for quite some time now. It's not something that is new. And it is, in fact, used as two different types of applications. So you're talking about hydrogen being used as a feedstock. What I mean when I say feedstock is it's used for its chemical properties as an input material to manufacturing either ammonia, methanol, for refining fossil fuels, essentially desulfurization and hydrocracking, or it can be used as a fuel. So globally, as we stand today, I think we consume about 110 million metric tons of hydrogen annually. Now, the challenge over here that we face is a lot of this hydrogen which is being consumed today comes from natural gas. So the goal today globally is to shift away from natural gas based hydrogen or coal based hydrogen to hydrogen which comes from electrolysis, essentially what we call green hydrogen. Now, we today have a trifecta of, I would say, technology, policy, and economics, which enable us to transition away from natural gas based hydrogen to water electrolytic hydrogen, which is green hydrogen, essentially taking renewable energy like solar, wind, splitting water, and then extracting the hydrogen for our applications. And this is quite evident through the policy frameworks that most of these countries have started announcing. Think today have over 30 plus countries which have national strategies, roadmaps, or vision documents which talk about how clean hydrogen is going to play a role in their net zero or their decarbonization targets.
Would you name a few countries?
Sure. So I think America has made their Hydrogen Earth short program quite clear, where they're trying to achieve $1 per kg of green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen in the next decade. Europe has clearly stated its plans to import green hydrogen or to import low carbon hydrogen from various other regions, since they have a dearth of renewable energy in the EU region. Countries like Japan and South Korea, which are world leaders already in hydrogen transportation solutions, are also going down this path where they have made their intentions quite clear. And India as well has launched its national green hydrogen mission in the January of 2023.
And let's talk about that, Anurag. I mean, I was coming to India, and yes, I believe its hydrogen ambitions are manifested most prominently in what is called the National Green Hydrogen Mission. Why don't we talk a little bit about that?
So India's National Green Hydrogen Mission is actually quite a comprehensive roadmap that showcases how India wants to start adopting green hydrogen into its economy. Now, I'll just start off with the targets that the mission is trying to achieve, which is to produce about 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen annually by 2030. So that essentially entails about close to 125 to 150 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity requirements for producing the green hydrogen. And of course, all the interconnected networks, whether it be through electricity transmission networks, innovation on the standards and regulations front, skilling, human development, pilot projects for testing various applications such as steel, transport, aviation, shipping, energy storage. So the mission takes sort of this holistic approach with a financial outlay of about 19,700 odd crores to target each of these individual sectors. So some of these sectors which consume the most amount of hydrogen globally today are ammonia manufacturing and refining, along with methanol and steel. Between these four sectors, you're essentially accounting for about 99% of global hydrogen consumption. And therefore, the demand drivers also through the National Hydrogen Mission are focused at enabling these heavy users of green hydrogen or heavy users of hydrogen to transition away from the coal based or natural gas based hydrogen to green hydrogen. So these other sectors are what I was referring to as the transportation sector, where road transport, rail, or shipping can essentially use hydrogen as a fuel for transport. You can start looking at hydrogen as a medium to store energy when there is no renewable energy being produced, when especially when there is no sun or when there is a lack of wind.
Anurag, we started the episode with a focus on, hydrogen for transportation, but it's obviously a much, much bigger story, right? So why don't you start by telling me about the transportation piece, how big or small it is, and what is the larger story in terms of course, use cases like industrial use cases, etc.
Sure, Anirban. I think that's a really great question. So I would try to compare the two applications of hydrogen. Let's take one industry, which is, let's say, an ammonia manufacturing facility, and let's take the transportation sector for our example. Let's use a bus or a truck. Ideally, a bus or a truck has a tank capacity which can use hydrogen, which can store up to maybe 50 to 60 kilograms of hydrogen. Right. So if your bus is now running every day or your truck is running every day, it would consume about 50 kgs of hydrogen. In comparison, we can do a yearly calculation as well. Assume the bus runs for 300 days a year. So that's 50 times 300, which is 1500 kgs of hydrogen per year. Now, to set the scale in context, a single ammonia manufacturing plant will consume at least about 10 to 50,000 kgs of hydrogen per year. So you see the stark difference in quantities over here. And ammonia plants are typically not small. They exist in the medium or large scale. So essentially now I'm going up to about, I'm talking in the 50 to 100,000 tons per year capacity. Compare that to a truck, which or a bus, which has a 50 kg tank capacity, or even a train, which might have a 200 or a 300 kg tank capacity. So you see the difference in scale over here when you're looking at different applications between industry and transport. So the challenge over here becomes, how do you reduce your costs when your scale itself is so small? And therefore, the goal globally whether it be through these green hydrogen missions or roadmaps or strategy documents, or from the industry perspective as well, is why don't we start making hydrogen for bulk consumers first? If you start making hydrogen for these bulk consumers first, you can achieve a scale which can give you cost reduction, and then start looking at creating opportunities for hydrogen to be used in other sectors, like either transport, energy storage, or for heating applications. So, hydrogen for transport is essentially a subset of the larger use cases of hydrogen. The larger use cases of
Hmm.
hydrogen exist for decarbonization of industry, from which transport is also going to take sort of learnings from. And why I say transportation is a subset of the larger hydrogen ecosystem is because transport, specifically on the road transport front, is already being electrified quite effectively. What I mean by that is just look outside on the roads. You have two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers which are electric today. And
Hmm.
electrification seems to be a solution which is already working for urban commuting and for short haul commuting.
Right.
So hydrogen is going to come in as a solution for transportation when you start looking at long haul transport, essentially transport that goes between cities or carries heavy loads. And that's where
Right.
trucks and buses, especially your intercity trucks and buses, shipping, railways, aviation, these sectors start to come in.
So, for a pure consumer point of view, one of the things hydrogen based transportation does is take care of range anxiety.
Yeah, and refueling times as well. You don't have to wait maybe, let's say, 4 hours or 5 hours to charge your vehicle. You can essentially top up using hydrogen in a matter of minutes. Essentially,
Sure,
similar, very similar to how we currently use CNG.
sure. What are the challenges then, Anurag, in adopting this technology?
I think one of the biggest challenges with hydrogen currently that we face is its source. We continue to get a lot of our
Hmm.
hydrogen from natural gas. Yes, we do have targets to move away from natural gas based hydrogen to electrolytic hydrogen, and that is happening. It's happening at pilot scale test facilities across applications in the steel sector, in the ammonia manufacturing sector, in refining. All of these guys are testing how to produce green hydrogen at scale. So one is the manufacturing process itself, which we are referring to over here as electrolytic hydrogen or green hydrogen, or even low carbon hydrogen for that matter, is very nascent. The technology for this it has existed for quite some time, but it has not existed at scale. And the second challenge is moving out of hydrogen applications from an industrial setting to a more commercial domestic setting. What I mean by that is today you have hydrogen which is being consumed at an industrial scale across these industries that we were referring to. But no, so far there have not been very widespread applications of hydrogen outside of these industries. There are no commercial refueling stations available like we have petrol and CNG stations. There are no commercial cylinders available to store hydrogen in case you want to use it for a heating purpose or if you want to use it for an energy storage purpose. And this all is bases the fact that hydrogen is one of the smallest, it is the smallest atom, right? It's first on the periodic table, which means that it needs a very, very robust storage and transportation medium. It is also it has very low volumetric density. What I mean by that is you need to pressurize your hydrogen to a very high level to get the and to extract the energy density that hydrogen can offer you. So
Mhm.
this high pressure requirement which hydrogen needs to fulfill to be able to have applications in the domestic sector is going to be one of the critical challenges, and specifically around from a safety standpoint. So now you're talking about an entire paradigm shift in the safety requirements, in the clearances, and the protocols and standards which need to be followed if you're looking at using hydrogen in the transportation sector. It would be very careless of any country or any regulatory authority to say that let's try and pilot a hydrogen project without having a full understanding of what the ecosystem level challenges are, especially around standards and safety protocols. And that is what the industry is facing as well today for hydrogen applications outside the industrial sector, specifically for transport, where we're talking about creating the regulatory environment, the state safety environment, and also the testing and standardization environment, so that auto manufacturers, refueling station manufacturers can come test, certify their equipment, and then deploy it for commercial use cases.
Right. So, finally, Anurag, do you see hydrogen becoming mainstream at any point in the future?
So the challenge before hydrogen becomes mainstream, I would still refer to would be two pronged, which is maturing the technology itself to a point where it is efficient enough to be commercially deployed. And second is how much of a policy push is this given by governments, whether it be through direct incentives or indirect incentives. But looking at sort of the global consensus across various countries as well, it seems to be most of these targets that I'm referring to within these hydrogen strategies, they are in the next decade or so. Most of the targets start hitting maturity in the 2030, 2035 mark. So I would say I'm an optimist. I would like to see that hydrogen does become mainstream in the next 10 years. But it is the pace of project deployment, the amount of financial commitments that governments and private industry are able to provide to these projects, which will give us the clarity if hydrogen is going to be mainstream in the next decade or so.
That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by Vinay Joshi and sound designed by Amrit Reggie. The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday on a listening platform of your choice. Friends, listeners, countrymen, keep lending us your ears. This is Anirban Chaudhary signing off. Have a good week ahead.